The council chamber was alive with the low hum of hovering lights and the occasional click of protocol drones as they hovered about, taking notes no one would ever read. Leora stood at the center, her long ears twitching impatiently, scanning the grand assembly of alien dignitaries who had apparently decided that she, with her sharp tongue and sharper wit, needed to be corrected through marriage to a human. She crossed her arms, her silk-like tunic rustling, and muttered under her breath in a language so refined that only the council's oldest members could catch it. Her glare alone could have melted steel, but the thought of being paired with a species she considered clumsy, ill-mannered, and oddly fascinated with orange-colored liquids made her twitch her ears further. Jace, the human man designated as her partner in this politically charged punishment, arrived with the grace of someone who had just survived a low-gravity treadmill accident. He stumbled slightly, sending a tray of nutrient pods spinning, which clattered harmlessly against the polished floor. "Ah, sorry. I meant to, greet you properly," he said, bowing with the sort of awkwardness that made Leora's left ear quiver in irritation and amusement simultaneously. She raised one slender eyebrow and tilted her head, ears flicking as if conducting an orchestra of disbelief. Humans, she had read, were inefficient in diplomacy, but this was artistry in clumsiness. The first moments were tense, yes, but humor crept into the cracks of the ceremony. When Jace reached to shake her hand, he misjudged the anti-gravity tiles and floated slightly off balance, landing with a soft thud that left him looking like a confused infant in a zero-G chamber. Leora pinched her own nose bridge with a delicate hand, attempting to hide a laugh that threatened to escape. The council, mistaking her twitching ears for distress, leaned forward in alarm, only for her to straighten up with dignity and mutter, "This human is either mad or extraordinarily foolish." Perhaps both. They were escorted to the quarters that would serve as temporary housing before the official bonding ceremony. The room was sleek, alien, and slightly unsettling in its symmetry. Bioluminescent walls pulsed gently, adjusting their hue to match the occupants' heart rhythms, a feature that left Jace nervously waving his hands in front of him, thinking he could adjust the lights manually. Leora shook her head, ears flicking. "You are not supposed to rearrange the entire lighting system. You are a guest of my misfortune," she said, voice edged with humor despite herself. Jace chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm trying, I swear. I come from a planet where the lights are, well, we have switches." His honesty made her snort softly, an entirely human-like reaction that she found herself mildly embarrassed by. The absurdity of teaching a human to navigate alien technology while simultaneously preparing herself for a forced marriage was almost laughable. Almost. Dinner arrived via hovering trays, each dish a molecular marvel of alien cuisine. Jace poked suspiciously at a glowing orb of protein, eventually giving it a gentle tap that sent it wobbling in the air like a confused jellyfish. Leora's ears twitched in both horror and amusement. "Do not poke it," she said sharply, though she bit back a smile. "It's alive enough to know your incompetence." Jace's sheepish grin, combined with the orb's wobble and a soft pop that sent a tiny mist into the air, caused them both to laugh, the sound echoing softly against the bioluminescent walls. That night, the gravity fields of the quarters offered another trial. As Leora attempted to sit on what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary chair, the human's mere presence altered the weight distribution, sending her floating an inch above the seat. "Really? Is it always like this?" she demanded, ears flicking in irritation and curiosity. Jace, trying to assist, ended up tangled in the anti-gravity threads, turning the whole scene into a slow-motion wrestling match. Eventually, they both collapsed onto a soft, levitating couch, breathless, and she found herself marveling at his earnest attempts to apologize and fix everything without actually fixing anything. Amidst the chaos, there were small victories. Leora realized that despite her initial resistance, Jace's awkward attentiveness, his constant attempts at humor, and the way he studied every nuance of her culture with wide-eyed fascination were disarming. She found herself speaking more than she intended, laughing more than she wanted to admit, and noticing that the twitch of her ears now often coincided with the human's clumsy charm rather than pure irritation. Outside the quarters, the station's corridors stretched into infinity, lined with transparent walkways that looked down into the swirling gas clouds of a nearby star. Robots rolled past, their mechanical eyes blinking in synchronized rhythm, occasionally bumping into walls in comical, almost slapstick fashion. Leora and Jace navigated these corridors together, each step a new dance of mistrust, humor, and tentative companionship. Jace would make offhand jokes about the lack of proper handrails, and she would respond with a dry quip about humans' inability to survive even simple low-gravity protocols without flailing. By the end of the first cycle of the station's artificial day, Leora felt the beginnings of a curious warmth, a dangerous spark of intrigue that she had not anticipated. The punishment, which had begun as a cold, political decree, was slowly evolving into a complicated and strangely compelling partnership. Jace, entirely unaware of the subtle shift in her emotions, simply offered her a floating cup of luminescent tea and smiled, his own nervous excitement reflected in the soft glow of the walls. Leora, ears twitching in a mix of amusement and reluctant interest, took the cup with a faint smirk. Perhaps this human was not entirely intolerable. Perhaps he was, in his own clumsy way, worth observing a little longer. And so, amid floating chairs, wobbling protein orbs, and the slow hum of an alien station that stretched on for miles, the first chapter of their story concluded, not with fireworks, but with laughter, small victories, and the beginnings of a bond that neither punishment nor protocol could have predicted. The next morning, Leora awoke to the soft hum of the station's artificial sunrise, her ears twitching as if in rhythm with the pulsating walls. The gravity in the quarters had been recalibrated overnight, leaving her floating just enough to make sitting upright an exercise in patience. Jace, already awake and tangled in what could only be described as a pile of anti-gravity blankets, waved a half-broken smile. "Morning," he said, voice thick with sleep, teeth slightly misaligned from an ambitious attempt to sleep on a levitating mattress. Leora's left ear twitched involuntarily, a reaction she had long learned to hide from most of her species. "You managed to survive your first night without breaking anything?" she asked, dry amusement in her tone. "I think so," he said, cautiously rising and nearly bumping into a floating bookshelf, though the bookshelf might argue otherwise. Indeed, a small stack of floating volumes had drifted into the corner in protest, their holographic titles flickering in protest. Leora suppressed a laugh, ear flicking. She found the human's clumsy engagement with her world endlessly entertaining, a bizarre counterpoint to the council's rigid expectations. Breakfast was delivered via robotic carriers, each dish a delicate swirl of proteins, carbohydrates, and shimmering liquids that looked like captured starlight. Jace poked at a luminescent sphere with his spoon, accidentally activating a mild propulsion field that sent it wobbling toward Leora. She caught it deftly with one hand, ears flicking as she smirked. "You do know these are supposed to be consumed, not launched into orbit," she teased. Jace's sheepish grin earned a suppressed chuckle from her. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the icy reserve she had cultivated over decades. Their first assignment of the day involved a diplomatic simulation designed to teach Jace the nuances of her culture. Holographic environments flickered into existence around them, depicting alien councils, interstellar marketplaces, and ceremonial halls. Jace tried to bow correctly in each setting, his movements stiff, often resulting in a near collision with holographic dignitaries who had no choice but to step aside or risk passing through a human. Leora, walking beside him with graceful precision, found herself unable to resist quipping, "If you topple the holographic council, I cannot promise they will forgive you, but I might." Her voice was laced with amusement, and Jace laughed, the sound echoing in the simulation chamber with a warm, human resonance. They wandered into a zero-gravity kitchen as part of one exercise, tasked with preparing a nutrient dish for the station's maintenance drones. Jace's first attempt ended with an anti-gravity blender spinning wildly, ejecting a cloud of glowing protein foam into the air. Leora ducked just in time, her ears flicking as the foam landed with a gentle plop on the floor. "Really human," she said, trying not to laugh. "You treat cooking like a battle you cannot win, yet somehow you survive." Jace grinned sheepishly. "I like to think of it as avant-garde culinary artistry." The two shared a laugh, the tension of the previous day melting into the hum of companionship. Later, as they walked along the station's observation deck, Leora noted how Jace stared with wide-eyed fascination at the swirling nebula outside. "It's enormous," he murmured almost reverently. Leora's ears twitched in response, and she found herself enjoying his simple wonder. "Enormous, yes, but don't stare too long. Gravity fields can shift unexpectedly, and you might drift off into the void." She added with a teasing smirk, and Jace's startled laugh made her own laughter bubble forth, a sound she rarely allowed in public. Their banter continued throughout the day, mixing humor with subtle lessons in diplomacy and culture. Jace, ever earnest, asked countless questions, some naive, some insightful, all asked with a sincerity that Leora could not dismiss. When a holographic mimic of her home city appeared in the training program, he exclaimed, "It's beautiful. But how do you keep the buildings from floating away?" Leora's ears flicked sharply, a sign of suppressed mirth. "We have protocols. Unlike some humans," she said, gesturing lightly at his nervous posture, causing him to grin and bow awkwardly. Evening brought a calm lull, and they found themselves in a quiet section of the station, where luminescent gardens floated in anti-gravity pods. The plants emitted a faint, pleasant hum, and Jace reached out to touch a leaf, only for it to retract slowly, almost playfully. Leora's ears twitched in amusement. "Even the flora here has more sense than some humans," she remarked. "Though I must admit, your persistence is charming." He turned, a blush rising across his face that had nothing to do with gravity. Their conversation drifted from trivial observations to subtle confessions. Jace admitted that he had never expected to be chosen for such an assignment, and certainly never to share space with someone as formidable as Leora. She, in turn, revealed fragments of her life, her love for small practical jokes, her obsession with star maps, the tiny quirks that made her uniquely her. Each revelation drew them closer, building a fragile bridge of trust across species, cultures, and unspoken expectations. When a malfunction in the station's corridor lights sent them tumbling through a corridor in gentle arcs, Leora found herself laughing freely, her ears bouncing in tandem with each float. Jace, equally amused, attempted to catch her, resulting in a tangle of limbs, floating cushions, and shared laughter. Gravity reasserted itself finally, leaving them both on the floor, breathless, with no dignity left to reclaim. And yet, in that moment, the punishment that had brought them together felt less like a sentence and more like a peculiar kind of opportunity, one that neither had anticipated, but both were beginning to embrace. As the artificial night descended, Leora settled into her levitating bed, reflecting on the day. Jace's humor, his awkward charm, and the warmth he elicited in moments of vulnerability had chipped away at her resistance. Her ears twitched in thought, a subtle signal even she did not fully understand, as she realized that the human assigned as punishment might, in fact, be the most unexpectedly delightful companion she had ever encountered. The galaxy outside continued to swirl, vast and unknowable, and yet inside the station, laughter and connection filled the void, heralding the slow evolution of an alliance, a friendship, and perhaps something far more intimate. The day began with the station's soft hum vibrating through the corridors, a steady heartbeat that mirrored Leora's own anticipation. For the first time since her arrival, She felt neither dread nor irritation when thinking of Jace. The human was already awake, sprawled in a levitating hammock that wobbled like a jellyfish, a cup of glowing tea precariously balanced on his chest. "Morning," he said, voice cracking slightly with sleep. "I didn't fall out this time." Leora's ears twitched, a subtle signal of amusement. "A minor miracle," she replied, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the hammock. He grinned, his awkward charm now a comfort rather than an annoyance. Their morning routine included a walk along the observation decks, where the station's transparent floors revealed the swirling nebulae far below. Jace paused to point out constellations, some entirely human in myth, some entirely fabricated by his imagination. Leora listened, ears flicking with interest, occasionally correcting him with a smirk. "That one is not a dragon," she said, "though I suppose if humans need dragons, this nebula will serve." Jace laughed, the sound echoing across the vacuum-sealed corridor. Humor, once a tool for easing tension, had now become a bridge, allowing them to connect across species, protocol, and expectation. Midday brought an unscheduled crisis, a minor containment failure in the station's bioluminescent gardens. A floating pod of luminescent flora had drifted into the main corridor, releasing a cloud of pollen that caused a mild hallucination in anyone nearby. Jace, ever curious, inhaled it with wide-eyed fascination, immediately declaring the floor glittery and excellent for dancing. Leora, caught between exasperation and laughter, grabbed his hand to steady him as they floated through the hall, navigating the chaos with grace. Together, they turned what could have been a disaster into an impromptu game of zero-gravity dodge, their laughter ringing louder than the alarms. The absurdity reminded them that even amidst galactic bureaucracy, joy could be found in the most unexpected places. After the garden incident, the council convened to formalize the bonding ceremony. Leora, now attuned to the rhythms of her own heart and the peculiar gravity of human affection, felt a surprising calm. Jace followed her, fumbling slightly with ceremonial robes that were clearly designed for someone less uncoordinated. When he tripped over the edge of a floating platform, she caught him effortlessly, ears twitching in amusement. "You are hopeless," she said, voice softening. "And yet I find that preferable." Jace's grin widened, and for the first time their eyes met with mutual understanding rather than polite tolerance. The ceremony itself was brief and ceremonious, punctuated by holographic projections of their respective cultures. Leora's people expected formal words, rituals, and declarations. Jace expected the gravity fields to behave, and the ceremonial drones not to crash into them. The moment arrived for their hands to meet, and Leora felt a thrill of something she had never allowed herself to name. She extended her hand, and when Jace's warm, steady grip closed around hers, a subtle energy seemed to pulse between them, an intimacy born not of duty, but of shared laughter, trust, and discovery. The council murmured approval, but the real significance lay in the quiet connection between alien and human, punishment transformed into choice. In the days that followed, Leora's quarters felt less like confinement and more like home. She and Jace explored every corner of the station, from the zero-gravity kitchens to the observation decks, where stars seemed to wink knowingly at their antics. They competed to see who could navigate the floating corridors with the most elegance. Each collision and stumble met with laughter. Their shared humor became a language of its own, replacing formal politeness with genuine affection. Even the smallest of incidents, a misfired anti-gravity tea service or a drifting chair, was transformed into a game, their interactions deepening the bond that had begun with political punishment. Leora's growth was subtle but undeniable. Where once she had been proud, rigid, and cautious, she now allowed herself vulnerability, curiosity, and delight in the unexpected. Her long ears, once twitching only in irritation, now moved in tandem with her amusement, her excitement, and sometimes unguarded affection. Jace, for his part, had evolved from a bumbling human into a capable, attentive partner, learning not only her customs but the quiet rhythms of her emotions. Their union, forged in obligation, had matured into a partnership of equals, built on laughter, mutual respect, and the thrill of shared discovery. One evening, as the station rotated to bring the distant sun into the observation window, Jace floated beside Leora, his hand brushing against hers as they watched the swirling colors of the nebula. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought punishment could be this fun." Leora snorted softly, ears flicking in amusement. "Fun is a human word," she replied, "but I suppose it fits." The warmth between them was tangible, the connection deep, a testament to the unexpected ways that life in the stars could transform even the strictest decrees into something beautiful. And so, amid glowing gardens, drifting corridors, and the endless expanse of stars, Leora and Jace moved forward together. The punishment had ended, but their journey was only beginning. In a universe governed by laws, politics, and duty, they had discovered something unquantifiable: joy, trust, and a bond that transcended species. Leora's sharp gaze softened, her ears twitched in quiet delight, and she realized that what began as obligation had become choice, desire, and an unshakable